I'm
Royal
so
Guard
glad
throws
you
his
could join
rifle.
me for this
After
dreadful
Camilla
formality.
SLAPS the little
My
Prince
pleasure
Louis for crying
entirely.
too loud.
I wouldn't have
The
missed it.
palace was unusually quiet at this early hour, save for the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant clatter of servants preparing breakfast. Inside, however, the nursery was alive with activity, as little Prince Louis had already begun his day. Louis, though still very young, was full of energy and curiosity. His wide, innocent eyes sparkled with mischief as he crawled around his room, exploring every corner and examining each object that caught his attention. He had a favorite set of colorful building blocks, which he attempted to stack precariously, only to watch them tumble over with delighted squeals. He laughed and clapped his tiny hands, but moments later, frustration set in when the tower he had built collapsed for the third time. The prince began to cry, the soft wails quickly growing louder, echoing through the grand corridors of the palace. The sound of Louis crying did not go unnoticed. From the adjoining room, Queen Consort Camilla, who had been reviewing documents for an upcoming royal engagement, heard the persistent crying. She had been feeling weary. The royal schedule had been relentless, filled with public appearances, ceremonies, and constant scrutiny. Her mind, already heavy with obligations, found it difficult to tolerate the sound of the prince's loud wails. Camilla had always prided herself on maintaining composure, even in stressful situations, but this morning, something in her patience began to wear thin. She entered the nursery briskly, her heels clicking sharply on the polished wooden floor. Louis, hearing footsteps, paused briefly, his small body trembling as he looked up. His eyes were filled with confusion and a hint of fear, not fully understanding why the usually gentle presence of Camilla now seemed tense. She bent slightly to reach his level, trying to quiet him, but the crying persisted. Every sound seemed louder, more insistent, and it pressed on her nerves like a sharp weight. In a sudden moment of frustration, Camilla's hand moved before her mind could intervene. She lightly slapped Louis's cheek, an act born of irritation rather than malice. The room fell silent for a brief second, as if time itself had paused. Louis's eyes widened in shock and hurt, and his cries transformed into louder wails. He clutched at his face, not understanding why someone he trusted had caused him pain. The sound that followed was piercing, carrying through the palace halls and reaching ears that were trained to respond to any sign of distress within the royal household. Nearby, a royal guard, stationed outside the nursery as part of his routine duty, immediately heard the escalating cries. He had been assigned to protect the young prince, a responsibility he took very seriously. His name was Sergeant William Harris, a man known for his unwavering discipline and absolute loyalty. Years of military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to follow orders without hesitation, and to prioritize the safety of those under his protection above all else. But this unexpected moment of crisis, challenged every rule he had ever learned. Harris had always believed that loyalty meant obedience, and obedience meant following commands without question. Yet, as he stood silently outside the nursery door, listening to Louis's cries and sensing the fear and confusion in the young prince's voice, he felt something stir deep within him. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened. He knew that what he was hearing was wrong. The situation demanded action, yet the formal protocols of the palace offered no guidance for a moment like this. Inside the nursery, Camilla was beginning to calm, though only slightly, as she attempted to soothe Louis. She murmured softly, trying to reassure him, yet her words seemed hollow, barely cutting through the young prince's distress. Louis, still upset and shaken by the unexpected slap, clung to his favorite toy, a plush animal that offered him a sense of comfort. His small fingers gripped the fabric tightly, and his eyes, still misted with tears, darted between the adults in the room, searching for protection and understanding. Harris's training kicked in. He knew that the presence of a royal guard alone could provide a sense of security for the young prince. Slowly, he approached the nursery, his boots making only the softest sound on the carpeted hallway. His movements were deliberate, controlled, and filled with the quiet authority that had earned him respect in every royal residence he had served. Yet today, authority alone did not seem enough. He needed to act not with force, but with a sense of moral duty that surpassed the strict rules he had always followed. As he entered the room, Harris's eyes met Camilla's. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken question of boundaries, responsibility, and care. Camilla, caught in the lingering frustration of the moment, hardly noticed him at first. She was still focused on calming the prince, unaware of the guard's inner turmoil. Harris stood firm, his gaze softening as he knelt down beside Louis. "Your Highness," he said gently, using the form of address reserved for the young prince, "you're safe, I'm here." His voice, calm and steady, immediately began to have an effect. Louis's cries, while not ceasing entirely, shifted in tone, from raw panic to a mix of confusion and cautious trust. Harris extended his hand slowly, allowing the prince to take it if he wished. Louis hesitated for a moment, then, guided by instinct and the comfort of a familiar protector, he grasped Harris's hand. Camilla finally turned her attention to the guard, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Her expression softened slightly, though a hint of defensiveness lingered. "It's just a bit of crying," she said, her voice attempting to sound casual. "He'll settle soon." Harris, however, understood more than just the surface problem. He understood the responsibility of protecting a child whose world was small but whose importance was immense. "With all respect, ma'am," he replied, keeping his voice measured, "he is frightened. He needs comfort, not punishment." The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of truth and conviction. Camilla paused, her mind flickering between royal protocol, public image, and her own exhaustion. She looked at Louis, whose tiny body was still trembling, and then at Harris, seeing the quiet determination in his eyes. For the first time, she recognized that this moment was about more than control or authority. It was about care, empathy, and understanding. Louis, feeling the warmth and security of Harris's presence, slowly began to calm. His tears diminished to soft sniffles, and he clung more tightly to the guard's hand. The plush toy, once a barrier between him and the world, now rested quietly in his lap. Harris spoke softly, telling small, comforting stories in a gentle voice, distracting the prince and helping him regain a sense of safety. The palace staff, who had been watching from a distance, whispered among themselves. This was unusual, even unprecedented. A royal guard, so disciplined and trained to follow orders, had taken a subtle but clear stand in defense of the child. His loyalty had not wavered, but it had shifted in priority, from blind obedience to the protection of the most vulnerable member of the royal family. Camilla, meanwhile, reflected quietly on her own actions. She had not intended to harm Louis, but the moment had escalated in a way that left everyone unsettled. She realized that authority alone could not command love or respect from a child. What mattered was compassion, patience, and the ability to understand the feelings of those smaller and more fragile than oneself. The room settled into a quiet calm. Louis, now safe and comforted, allowed himself to be picked up by Harris, who carried him gently to a softer area of the nursery. The young prince's sobs had faded, replaced by occasional curious glances around the room. Camilla watched, her expression a mix of relief and contemplation. Harris had not only calmed the prince, but had reminded everyone present of the deeper responsibility inherent in caring for a child of such importance. Outside the nursery, the morning continued as usual. The gardens glistened in the sunlight, birds chirped in their rhythmic melodies, and the palace staff resumed their duties with renewed awareness of the delicate balance between discipline and care. Inside, the nursery had become a small sanctuary of understanding, a place where the prince's needs were prioritized, and where adults were reminded of the power of empathy and protection. Harris, standing quietly by the window with Louis in his arms, reflected on the events of the morning. Loyalty, he understood now, was more than obedience to orders. It was the courage to act rightly when no rule clearly dictated what was moral or just. Louis's small hand rested in his, warm and trusting, and Harris knew that this moment, this simple act of standing by a child, was worth more than any accolade or recognition he could ever receive. And so, as the palace slowly came to life with the day ahead, one thing was certain. The morning had begun not with noise and chaos alone, but with a lesson in care, protection, and the quiet strength of doing what is right. The events of the day would leave impressions on everyone involved, and while the world outside the palace walls would never know the details, inside, a small prince had been protected, a royal guard had demonstrated true courage, and a queen consort had learned the subtle, yet powerful importance of patience and empathy. The nursery, once filled with cries of frustration, now echoed with soft laughter and gentle whispers. Louis, still young but resilient, played quietly with his blocks, occasionally glancing up to see Harris watching over him. The guard's presence was a silent promise. He would always protect, always comfort, and always act with the best interest of the young prince at heart. It was a morning that began with tension, but ended with understanding. A reminder that even in the grand halls of royalty, the simplest acts of care can make the greatest difference. After the tense morning in the nursery, a heavy silence settled over Buckingham Palace. The faint echoes of little Prince Louis's earlier cries had faded, but the memory of them lingered in the minds of everyone present. Sergeant William Harris stood quietly near the nursery, his eyes still on the young prince, ensuring he was truly calm. Though the immediate crisis seemed to have passed, Harris knew that the tension in the room had not fully dissipated. Something deeper had shifted. An invisible line had been crossed that required careful attention. Inside the nursery, Louis was beginning to play again, stacking his colorful blocks with tentative concentration. He glanced occasionally at Harris, who watched him like a guardian eagle, ready to intervene if necessary. The young prince's trust in Harris had grown rapidly during those first moments of chaos. He felt safe with the guard, a comfort that no amount of toys or nursery routines could provide. Harris, on the other hand, felt a profound sense of responsibility. Protecting the young prince was no longer just part of his duty, it had become a moral imperative. Camilla, still present in the room, observed the interaction between Harris and Louis. She had attempted to regain her composure, smoothing down her dress and adjusting her hair, but her mind was clouded with unease. The slap earlier, impulsive and unthinking, weighed heavily on her conscience. She watched the gentle way Harris engaged with Louis, realizing that she had underestimated the power of patience and care. Every gesture, every word from the guard seemed to soothe the prince in ways that her own attempts had failed to do. Harris, noticing her gaze, spoke softly. "Your Highness," he said, "children respond to kindness and understanding more than to fear or correction." Louis needed reassurance, not discipline. His words were firm but respectful, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent years observing, protecting, and making difficult judgments. Camilla nodded slightly, though her pride and position made it hard for her to fully accept the correction. She understood intellectually that he was right, yet emotionally, she felt defensive. The young prince, now calm, crawled toward Harris, clutching his favorite toy. The guard knelt down, holding out his hands, allowing Louis to climb into his lap. The prince rested his small head against Harris's shoulder, finding comfort in the presence of someone who seemed unwavering and trustworthy. Harris spoke in a calm, rhythmic voice, telling gentle stories and asking light, distracting questions. Slowly, Louis's breathing steadied, and the tension that had filled the room began to dissipate. But outside the nursery, a different kind of tension was brewing. Other guards and palace staff had been observing the events from the hallway, whispering among themselves. Sergeant Harris was known for his strict discipline, his loyalty, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. Yet the unusual circumstances of this morning had revealed a side of him that few had seen before, one where instinct and conscience overrode strict protocol. Some of the staff felt admiration for his courage, while others felt concern about what his actions might mean for palace order. Inside the nursery, the situation reached another quiet tipping point. Harris's calm presence had begun to highlight the stark contrast between his care and the earlier reaction of Camilla. Though she had not intended harm, the moment of frustration had created an impression that would not easily fade. Harris could see the prince's eyes dart toward her occasionally, a mixture of confusion and residual fear. He understood that the next moments would be delicate. He had to protect not just the prince's body, but also his trust and emotional well-being. Camilla attempted to intervene, offering soft words and gentle gestures. "Louis, it's all right now. You're safe," she said, trying to mirror the calm tone Harris used. The prince looked at her but did not move toward her immediately. Instead, he buried himself closer into Harris's protective embrace. Harris, sensing the subtle hesitation, did not scold or command. Instead, he simply maintained a calm, reassuring presence, letting the prince feel safe enough to decide when he wanted to interact. As the minutes passed, Harris's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. His training as a royal guard had always emphasized absolute obedience to the rules of the palace, to the royal family, and to maintaining order above all else. Yet here he faced a dilemma that could not be solved by following rules alone. Protecting a child, he realized, sometimes meant standing up in ways that challenged authority. The instinct to defend, to ensure that harm did not come again, was now stronger than any fear of reprimand. Camilla, for her part, began to notice the intensity in Harris's eyes. She had seen him in action many times, responding to emergencies with precision and discipline, but today there was a different energy, something deeper and more personal. She sensed that he was not just following protocol, he was guided by an unspoken moral compass. This realization made her pause. She had authority in the palace, certainly, but Harris's loyalty and bravery reminded her that true influence could come from quiet strength rather than official position. The young prince, now resting more comfortably, looked up at Harris. His trust was clear, and in that moment, Harris felt the full weight of his responsibility. Every decision mattered. Every action he took could either nurture the child's sense of security or inadvertently deepen his fear. Harris's training and instinct aligned perfectly in this delicate situation. He spoke softly, engaging Louis in playful conversation, asking about his favorite toys, and narrating small adventures that captured the prince's imagination. Camilla observed silently, realizing that the emotional connection between Harris and Louis was something she had overlooked. It was not just about discipline or rules. It was about understanding, empathy, and timing. Every word from Harris seemed carefully measured to reassure and calm, to restore confidence and trust. Slowly, the tension in the room transformed from a near crisis into a quiet, almost peaceful atmosphere. Yet even as the nursery found temporary calm, Harris remained vigilant. He knew that children's emotions could shift rapidly, and one small trigger could undo all the progress. He positioned himself strategically between the prince and any potential sources of stress. His eyes scanned the room, noting every detail: the position of toys, the movement of Camilla, even the slight creak of the floorboards that could startle Louis. Every action, every movement was calculated to maintain security without creating a sense of restriction. Meanwhile, Camilla's reflection deepened. She realized that leadership, particularly in a household as complex as the royal family, was not only about rules, appearances, or authority. It was about understanding human behavior, responding to emotions, and sometimes admitting mistakes. The morning had been an uncomfortable lesson, but it was an essential one. She began to consider how she could adjust her approach, not out of fear of criticism, but out of genuine desire to nurture the young prince. Outside the nursery, the palace corridors were buzzing quietly with whispers among the staff. Some were questioning how such an incident could happen unnoticed, while others debated the courage it had taken for Harris to intervene in a situation where the lines between duty and morality were blurred. There was a shared sense of awe at the guards' composure and strength of character. Whispers began circulating about whether the incident would have consequences, whether Harris would face reprimand, and what the royal family would think of his actions. Back in the nursery, Louis's energy began to shift from agitation to curiosity. Harris introduced gentle games, allowing the prince to explore the room safely. Every step, every gesture was carefully designed to restore confidence. The young prince's earlier tears had left a mark, but they were gradually replaced by laughter and smiles, small signs of resilience that Harris welcomed quietly. He knew that trust once broken could be slow to rebuild, but each small interaction reinforced the bond between protector and child. Camilla, now more composed, watched the scenes unfold with a mix of emotions. She felt relief that Louis had calmed, but also a lingering unease at her own earlier behavior. She began to reflect on her role, on how stress and frustration could cloud judgment, and on how important it was to model calmness and patience. The morning had revealed vulnerabilities in everyone, but it had also demonstrated the potential for courage, understanding, and growth. Harris, sensing that the immediate danger had passed but recognizing the tension still lingering in the room, made a decision. He carefully positioned himself with one hand resting near Louis, not to restrain, but to offer reassurance. His other hand remained ready to respond if needed, though his intention was not to act with force. It was a subtle balance of vigilance and care, a demonstration of what true protection meant. Time passed slowly but steadily as the nursery transitioned from chaos to calm. Louis, finally secure in Harris's presence, began to explore again, his laughter filling the room with a light, joyful sound. The guard's eyes softened, satisfied that the young prince was safe. The lesson of the morning, though unspoken, was clear. Sometimes the right course of action requires courage, empathy, and the wisdom to act when rules alone are insufficient. By mid-morning, the palace had returned to its usual rhythm. Staff moved quietly about their duties, aware of the delicate balance required to maintain order and care within such historic walls. Harris remained vigilant but relaxed slightly, knowing that he had successfully guided the young prince through a moment of distress. Camilla, meanwhile, retreated briefly to gather herself, reflecting deeply on what had transpired and what it meant for her role in the life of the young prince. In the quiet aftermath, Harris knew that the day was far from over. The events of the morning had set the stage for further challenges, yet he felt a sense of clarity and purpose that he had never experienced before. Protecting a child, especially one so young and important, required more than training. It required moral courage, patience, and the willingness to stand firm in the face of uncertainty. As Louis played contentedly, unaware of the emotional lessons unfolding around him, Harris allowed himself a brief moment of introspection. He understood that the coming hours would demand the same careful attention, the same balance of vigilance and compassion. But he was prepared. For the young prince, for the palace, and for the principles he held dear, he would act decisively, guided by conscience, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to do what was right. The morning had started with loud cries, frustration, and tension, but it ended with a quiet understanding that sometimes true bravery is not in following orders blindly, but in protecting the innocent with courage, patience, and unwavering moral conviction. Harris's silent promise to the young prince had been made, and it would shape the day, the household, and perhaps even the lives of everyone involved. The calm that had settled over Buckingham Palace after the morning's nursery incident did not last long. Though little Prince Louis was now quietly playing with his blocks under Sergeant Harris's watchful eye, the tension in the household remained palpable. Staff whispered quietly among themselves, exchanging glances that carried unspoken questions. What had just happened was unlike anything they had experienced before. A royal family was always under scrutiny, but this morning's events had escalated into something far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Harris, meanwhile, remained vigilant. Though Louis was calm, the guard sensed the lingering stress in the room. Every subtle movement, every change in the prince's expression was noted with intense attention. Harris had trained for years to anticipate danger and protect those under his care, but today's situation was different. The threat was not from an intruder or a physical hazard. It came from within the palace itself. Protecting the prince meant navigating a web of authority, emotions, and delicate relationships. Camilla, still uneasy after her earlier loss of temper, attempted to engage with Louis. She spoke softly, offering gentle encouragement and soothing words. Yet Harris noticed that her presence, though well-intentioned, carried a tension that the young prince could sense. Louis glanced toward her occasionally, his expression uncertain. The guard could see the small signs of wariness in the prince's posture and subtle hesitations in his movements. Harris knew that he had to act carefully. He could not allow the prince to feel threatened, nor could he risk escalating the situation further. He decided to maintain his calm and reassuring presence, letting Louis determine when he would interact with Camilla. The young prince's trust had been shaken, and Harris understood that it would take time to rebuild fully. In this delicate balance, Harris's moral judgment and years of training collided, guiding him toward an unusual but necessary course of action. Outside the nursery, the murmurs among the staff grew louder. The unusual tension had caught the attention of senior members of the palace, and soon whispers reached the ears of other guards stationed throughout the building. News of the morning's events began to circulate quietly but rapidly. Questions arose. Had Camilla's frustration been inappropriate? Had Harris acted outside protocol? And most importantly, what would the royal family say? Suddenly, the quiet of the hallway was broken by a sharp sound, the accidental knock of a tray carried by a nervous staff member. Louis startled, his small body jerking with surprise. His cries returned, louder and more urgent this time, breaking the fragile calm Harris had worked so hard to maintain. Camilla, alarmed, stepped closer, reaching out instinctively to comfort the prince. Her voice carried tension, even as she tried to soothe him. Harris's patience, already tested, began to reach its limit. The guard's mind raced through every possible outcome, every way to protect the young prince. He understood the importance of maintaining discipline, of following orders, but this moment demanded more than protocol. Louis's safety and emotional well-being were paramount. Harris could not allow the child to be hurt again, not physically, not emotionally. His heart pounded as he weighed his options, knowing that any sudden move could escalate the situation. Camilla, unaware of the internal conflict building within the guard, continued to reach toward Louis. She spoke softly, her tone attempting calmness, but the prince's cries only intensified. Harris stepped forward subtly, positioning himself between Camilla and Louis. His eyes were steady, his stance deliberate. The message was clear: he would protect the prince, no matter the circumstances. The tension reached a breaking point. Harris's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle he carried as part of his ceremonial duty. The weapon was heavy, a symbol of authority and power. But in that moment, it represented more than duty. It represented the impossible balance between loyalty, conscience, and moral courage. Harris's decision came swiftly. With a precise and controlled motion, he lifted the rifle, and with all the force his strength allowed, threw it across the room. The sound of the rifle hitting the polished floor echoed like a thunderclap. Every head in the room turned instantly, eyes wide with shock. The palace staff froze, unsure of what to do next. Camilla stepped back, startled and momentarily speechless. Even the usually unflappable Harris felt a jolt of adrenaline. The act was not violent toward anyone, but it was a powerful declaration. He would not allow harm to come to the young prince, not under his watch. Louis, startled by the loud sound, stopped crying immediately. His small eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly recognized the calm authority in Harris's presence. The prince's trust in his protector had only deepened. He clung to Harris instinctively, sensing that the guard's actions, though dramatic, were meant to safeguard him. Harris knelt down, speaking softly, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos around them. "It's all right, Your Highness. You are safe. I will protect you." The room was tense with unspoken emotions. Camilla, though regaining her composure, could not ignore the weight of the guard's actions. She understood, perhaps for the first time fully, the depth of his loyalty and the strength of his convictions. Harris had acted not out of rebellion, but out of an unwavering commitment to the child's safety. It was a lesson in moral courage that transcended rank, protocol, or authority. Outside the nursery, the palace staff began to react. Some whispered in admiration, recognizing the bravery required to challenge expectations in defense of a child. Others were fearful, wondering about the potential consequences. The incident had disrupted the usual order, raising questions about loyalty, obedience, and the delicate balance of authority within the royal household. Every eye was on Harris, awaiting the response of the family and the staff alike. Camilla, regaining her voice, attempted to speak. "Sergeant Harris," she said, her tone measured, though tinged with lingering surprise, "that was unexpected." Her words were careful, attempting to assert authority while acknowledging the unusual situation. Harris, maintaining his calm demeanor, replied simply, "Your Highness, my duty is to protect the young prince. I will not allow harm to come to him." The statement, quiet but firm, carried weight beyond the immediate room. It was a declaration of principle, a reminder that loyalty to a child could outweigh blind obedience to protocol. Camilla's expression softened, reflecting an internal acknowledgement of the truth in his words. Though pride and position made acceptance difficult, she realized that Harris's actions were guided by an unshakable moral compass. Louis, sensing the shift in tone, relaxed slightly in Harris's arms. The cries had subsided entirely, replaced by cautious curiosity. The young prince looked around the room, his small eyes observing the reactions of the adults. Harris held him securely, maintaining a protective presence while allowing him the space to regain confidence. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, awareness, and unwavering attention to every detail. The senior members of the palace were summoned as news of the incident spread. Discussions began in hushed tones behind closed doors. Questions were asked. Should Harris face disciplinary action? Had Camilla's behavior warranted correction? How would the young prince be supported emotionally moving forward? Every decision had implications not only for the individuals involved, but also for the public image of the royal family. Harris, aware of the scrutiny, remained composed. He had acted according to conscience, guided by the principle that protecting a child sometimes requires difficult choices. His actions, though dramatic, were necessary. The safety of the young prince, both physical and emotional, was paramount. Harris understood that the consequences of inaction could have been far worse than any potential reprimand. Camilla, reflecting privately on the event, began to recognize the lessons embedded in the incident. Authority and protocol were important, yes, but they were insufficient in moments that demanded empathy, courage, and moral clarity. Harris's act, though startling, had protected the young prince and maintained the integrity of the household in a deeper, more meaningful way than strict adherence to rules could have achieved. As the day progressed, the palace slowly regained its routine. Louis, now calm and curious, explored the nursery with renewed energy, occasionally glancing at Harris for reassurance. The young prince's trust in his protector had grown immeasurably. Harris continued to monitor, ensuring that the child's safety and comfort remained secure. Every detail, from the placement of toys to the tone of conversation, was carefully managed to reinforce the sense of safety and stability. The incident with the rifle became a pivotal moment, quietly shaping the attitudes and awareness of everyone present. Staff members reflected on the courage it took for a guard to act in defense of a child, even when it meant defying convention. Camilla, too, considered how to approach her interactions with the young prince in the future, understanding the importance of patience, empathy, and self-control. Harris, observing Louis playing happily once again, felt a quiet satisfaction. His decision, though shocking to some, had been necessary and right. He understood that true loyalty sometimes requires standing up for what is right, even in the face of potential consequences. Protecting the innocent, he realized, was the highest duty a guardian could fulfill. By evening, the palace had settled into a careful calm. Discussions about the morning's events continued quietly behind closed doors, but in the nursery, peace prevailed. Harris sat near Louis, keeping a watchful eye while allowing the young prince to explore freely. Camilla observed from a distance, reflecting on the lessons learned and quietly acknowledging the guard's dedication and bravery. The morning's dramatic events, the cries, the slap, the chaos, and the throwing of the rifle, would remain in memory as a moment of intense emotion, courage, and moral clarity. Harris had acted decisively, protecting the young prince and setting an example of the power of conscience, empathy, and unwavering dedication. In the quiet of the palace, Harris understood that his actions had made a difference. Louis was safe, comforted, and beginning to rebuild his sense of security. The young prince's trust in his protector was stronger than ever, and the lesson for everyone present was clear. True courage sometimes requires defying expectations, standing firm in one's convictions, and prioritizing the well-being of those most vulnerable above all else. The palace, though returning to its ordinary rhythm, had been forever changed by that one intense morning. Every member of the household had witnessed an extraordinary display of moral courage, and the implications would ripple quietly through the days to come. Harris's actions, while dramatic, had demonstrated that protecting the innocent and doing what is right can sometimes require extraordinary measures, even in the grand halls of Buckingham Palace. The events of that dramatic morning had left a lasting impression on Buckingham Palace. Though the immediate chaos had subsided, the echoes of tension and surprise lingered in the minds of everyone involved. Inside the nursery, little Prince Louis was now happily playing with his toys under the watchful eye of Sergeant William Harris. The young prince's laughter, soft but joyful, filled the room, signaling a return to calm. Yet outside the nursery, the palace was alive with whispers and quiet conversations about what had occurred. Harris remained vigilant as always. Though Louis was calm, the guard knew that children's emotions were delicate and could shift quickly. His protective instincts had only deepened after the morning's incident, and he remained attentive to every small movement, every subtle change in the prince's expression. His presence was not just physical protection, it was a source of reassurance for the young prince, a reminder that he was safe no matter what had happened earlier. Camilla, still recovering from the stress of the morning, found a quiet moment to reflect on her actions. She had always been conscious of her public image, her behavior carefully measured in front of the world. But the morning's events had revealed something more personal, something that could not be ignored. The slap had been impulsive, born from frustration and exhaustion, but its impact had been immediate and profound. Seeing the consequences of her actions, especially through the eyes of Harris and the young prince, left her with a sense of deep unease. The queen consort understood that her role as a caregiver extended far beyond ceremonial duties. Patience, empathy, and emotional awareness were as essential as decorum and public appearances. Harris's calm and courageous intervention had not only protected Louis, but also provided her with a powerful example of how to act with integrity and care. It was a lesson she would not soon forget. The palace staff, meanwhile, were in quiet reflection. Many whispered in admiration about Harris's bravery and moral courage. He had acted decisively in a situation where rules and protocol might have otherwise constrained him. Others discussed the unusual nature of the morning, debating what it would mean for the household going forward. The balance between obedience and conscience had been tested, and the incident had demonstrated that true protection sometimes requires more than simple compliance with orders. As the day progressed, senior members of the royal household convened to discuss the incident in detail. Conversations were careful and measured, focusing on how to support the young prince emotionally and ensure that similar situations could be handled more smoothly in the future. Questions were asked about procedures, the training of staff, and the protocols surrounding moments of stress or conflict. Harris's actions were examined, not with the intent to punish, but to understand the choices he had made and the principles that had guided him. Harris himself remained composed throughout these discussions. He knew that he had acted in the best interest of the young prince, guided by a sense of moral duty that transcended protocol. His actions had been dramatic, yes, but necessary. He had protected Louis from immediate emotional harm, restored his sense of security, and demonstrated to the entire household the importance of acting with courage and conscience. Even under scrutiny, Harris's demeanor was calm, measured, and respectful, reflecting the qualities that had made him such a reliable protector. Camilla, observing these discussions, began to reconsider her own behavior and approach. She recognized that leadership and authority in the royal household were not simply about rules, appearances, or maintaining order. They were about understanding human emotions, responding appropriately to stress, and nurturing trust and safety. The morning's events had been uncomfortable, but they were also enlightening. Camilla resolved to approach her interactions with Louis with more patience, empathy, and understanding, appreciating the delicate balance required to support a young child in such an extraordinary environment. Louis, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the full gravity of the morning's events. To him, it had been a moment of intense emotion, followed by reassurance and comfort. The presence of Harris had provided him with a sense of safety that words alone could not convey. His laughter and playful energy returned, a sign that the young prince was beginning to rebuild trust and regain emotional balance. Each smile, each giggle, was a testament to the guard's careful attention and the power of compassionate intervention. Throughout the day, Harris continued to engage with the young prince, allowing him to explore, play, and interact with his environment freely. Every gesture, every word was carefully measured to reinforce the sense of safety and trust. The guard's presence was both protective and reassuring, creating a calm atmosphere in the nursery that contrasted sharply with the morning's chaos. Louis's confidence grew steadily, his small personality shining through as he explored his surroundings with curiosity and delight. Camilla, observing quietly from a distance, began to engage more thoughtfully with the young prince. She used soft tones, gentle gestures, and patient interactions, guided by the example Harris had set earlier. The combination of her renewed approach and Harris's steadfast presence allowed Louis to feel secure while still engaging with the adults around him. It was a delicate balance, but one that gradually restored harmony to the nursery. As evening approached, the palace settled into its usual rhythm. Staff members returned to their duties with a renewed sense of awareness, mindful of the lessons learned from the morning's events. Discussions continued quietly behind closed doors, focusing on emotional care, communication, and the importance of moral courage in moments of stress. The incident had left a mark on everyone involved, shaping perspectives and influencing future behavior. Harris, reflecting privately, understood the significance of his actions. Protecting the young prince required more than physical vigilance. It required moral clarity, patience, and the courage to act decisively when necessary. His decision to throw the rifle, while shocking, had been a statement of principle, a demonstration that true loyalty sometimes means standing up for what is right, even when it challenges convention. The young prince's safety, comfort, and trust were worth any risk to his own position or reputation. Camilla, too, reflected on the lessons learned. She recognized that moments of frustration and impatience could have lasting consequences if not managed carefully. The morning had revealed vulnerabilities, both in herself and in the household, but it had also provided an opportunity for growth. She resolved to approach her responsibilities with greater empathy and understanding, appreciating the importance of emotional intelligence alongside ceremonial duties. The young prince, blissfully unaware of the full complexity of the events around him, continued to play. His laughter and joy became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in extraordinary circumstances, the care and attention of responsible adults could restore security and happiness. Harris remained close, guiding and observing, ensuring that the environment remained safe and supportive. The palace, though returning to normal routines, had been quietly transformed. The events of that morning, the cries, the slap, the dramatic intervention, had highlighted the importance of empathy, moral courage, and careful attention to the needs of the most vulnerable. Staff and family members alike carried the lessons forward, recognizing that true protection and leadership required both action and understanding. As night fell, Louis was gently guided to his bed by Harris. The young prince's eyes were heavy with fatigue, but his expression was calm and content. Harris tucked him in carefully, ensuring that every detail contributed to a sense of comfort and security. The prince's small hand rested in the guard's, a silent acknowledgement of trust and reassurance. Harris spoke softly, reminding Louis that he was safe, that he was cared for, and that the events of the day were now behind him. Camilla, standing quietly nearby, observed the scene with a mixture of relief and contemplation. She had witnessed firsthand the power of patience, courage, and moral integrity. The morning's chaos had been resolved, not through authority or command alone, but through the thoughtful, protective actions of someone who understood the deeper responsibilities of care. It was a lesson that would resonate long after the palace had returned to its usual rhythms. The young prince drifted into sleep, the stress of the morning replaced by peaceful dreams. Harris remained close, a silent sentinel, ensuring that Louis remained safe throughout the night. The guard's commitment to the child's well-being had not wavered. It would not waver. In protecting the young prince, Harris had demonstrated that true loyalty and courage are defined not by obedience alone, but by the willingness to act decisively and ethically in moments of uncertainty. Camilla left the nursery quietly, her thoughts reflective. She understood that the morning had been a pivotal moment for the household, a reminder that leadership requires empathy, patience, and moral clarity. She resolved to carry these lessons forward, not only in her interactions with Louis but in all aspects of her life within the royal household. Outside the nursery, the palace staff continued their duties with renewed awareness. Every member of the household had witnessed the extraordinary courage and moral clarity displayed by Harris. The lessons of the day would inform future actions, shaping the way the palace approached moments of stress, conflict, and emotional vulnerability. Harris, remaining vigilant but composed, reflected on the events of the day. The dramatic act of throwing the rifle had been a turning point, a statement of principle and protection. He had acted out of loyalty, conscience, and moral courage, ensuring that the young prince's safety and emotional well-being were prioritized above all else. His actions had set an example that would resonate throughout the household for years to come. As the night deepened, peace settled over Buckingham Palace. The young prince slept soundly, comforted by the presence of a guardian who had demonstrated extraordinary courage and care. Camilla, having reflected on her actions and the lessons of the day, rested with a newfound understanding of patience, empathy, and the responsibilities of leadership. The events of the morning, the cries, the frustration, the dramatic intervention, and the restoration of calm, would be remembered as a moment of moral courage, emotional growth, and profound protection. Buckingham Palace had witnessed the power of conscience and care, and the young prince had learned in his own small way that he was safe, valued, and protected by those entrusted with his well-being. In the quiet of the night, Harris reflected once more on the significance of his actions. He understood that true bravery sometimes requires defying expectations, challenging authority when necessary, and acting with unwavering moral clarity. Protecting the innocent, he knew, was the highest duty a guardian could fulfill. And as he watched over the sleeping young prince, he felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had done exactly what was right. The morning had begun with noise, frustration, and fear, but it ended with calm, trust, and understanding. Lessons had been learned, bonds had been strengthened, and the palace had quietly transformed through the courage, patience, and moral integrity displayed that day. The young prince slept peacefully, the household moved forward with renewed awareness, and Harris remained a steadfast protector, ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. And so the story concluded not with chaos or punishment, but with reflection, growth, and the quiet triumph of empathy, courage, and unwavering commitment to doing what is right. Buckingham Palace, a place of history and tradition, had once again witnessed the profound impact that one person's moral courage can have on the lives of others, especially the most vulnerable and innocent.